So we should be live. The participant number is jumping.
You're recording, Rebecca, right?
It's automatically recording. We'll wait until that participant number stabilizes because it looks like everyone's joining in. Mario, I can confirm I have the recording icon on my side. The attendees number is still climbing. Okay, it looks like for now we're starting to stabilize off. Mario, would you like to give the introduction?
Well, good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this very interesting webinar organized by the SIPA Emerging Professionals with the support of ICOMOS, the National Trust for Canada, and the NSERC Create Heritage Engineering Program. Today we have an excellent schedule and activities. I hope that you enjoy. I'm just going to say a few words on behalf of SIPA. Our board member Gracia Tucci, Professor Gracia Tucci from Florence, has some technical issues. So I just want to say that SIPA is the Heritage Documentation Committee. SIPA is one of the scientific committees of the International Council of Monuments and Sites, and also is one of the scientific committees of the International Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. And this makes SIPA very interesting for people that are in the field of documentation, because it meets both the needs of technology and the needs of conservation. And this is provided by the two organizations. And we are very proud to have a very active emerging professionals group represented by Becca, Statis, and Michelle. And I give the floor to Becca, Statis, and Michelle now. Thank you.
Yeah, great. We'd also like to have Chris open up.
Thanks so much, Becca. Yes, I'm Chris Weave, and I'm the Manager of Heritage Policy and Government Relations at the National Trust for Canada. Just want to say a few words about the National Trust. We're a national membership-based charity that leads and inspires action for Canada's historic places. And we have a long track record of working with communities to save and renew historic places through such tools as regeneration works. The COVID-19 pandemic and resulting social isolation measures have left many heritage places in Canada and around the globe scrambling to amplify their digital presence. With that in mind, we're really excited to have to be part of bringing this international conversation around digital tools and heritage places to all of you. A recording of this webinar will later be available on the National Trust Regeneration Works website, and we'll have a link in connection with the SIPA website as well. So you can share it with your friends and colleagues if they weren't able to join today. We're really grateful to be working, as Mario said, with SIPA Emerging Professionals, ICOMOS, and CERT Create Heritage Engineering Program on this very timely webinar today. So thanks so much, and looking forward to hearing more from everyone.
Okay, so we would like to help Mario and Grazia and Chris for their welcome addresses on behalf of the SIPA Emerging Professionals. We would also like to welcome you to the webinar Assessing Heritage Places from Home. We sincerely hope that during this period of severe and unforeseen circumstances, you and your families are remaining safe and well. The original idea for this webinar that actually developed into a more than 350 people session now belongs to our co-panelists Mario and Chris, and we tried our best to materialize it with continuous support from SIPA, National Trust for Canada, ICOMOS, and the NSERC Create Heritage Engineering Program. We aimed to create an online interactive session and not a lecture, so that you can participate actively, engage, be informed, ask questions about ways to access and to assess heritage remotely when conditions do not allow you to visit physically. Some of the main topics that we are going to cover are digital access and storytelling for heritage purposes, participation and learning through virtual experiences, 3D modeling for heritage sharing, and remote cultural heritage monitoring with novel technologies. We attempted to make the content attractive to a broad audience of different backgrounds, because we are aware of the multiplicity of approaches towards heritage places and the limitations that available resources may impose, especially under the current circumstances. Thus, we approach our topics from different viewpoints, from technical to non-technical, to reflect varying perception of heritage by the public. And now Rebecca will briefly describe the structure of the webinar. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, Stathis. So in the introduction section, we've heard the welcoming address, and up next, I'd like to give some details for the other sections of the webinar. This webinar is organized into a short talk section and then a discussion session where you can participate. We kindly ask that you keep your mics muted for both parts and to not interrupt the panelists. The talk session is moderated by SIPA EP coordinators, including myself and Stathis and Michelle. During the first section, and after we introduce them individually, each panelist will have 10 minutes to briefly address their topic related to remote heritage access.
Okay, perfect. So some simple rules for the Q&A section. So we will open the floor for your questions. You can express them only through the Q&A option of Zoom. Please upvote the questions of others that you find interesting, so that we can choose those that are most common or interesting amongst the audience and address them to the panelists accordingly. Please do not use the chat box to send questions. The chat feature will be used only for discussion between the audience members. Also, we kindly want to inform you that no spamming, offensive language, bullying, or mansplaining will be tolerated. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for clarifying on those points, Stathis. I also want to just say that at the end of the webinar, Mario Santana, who already gave an introduction, the Vice President of ICOMOS, will express some closing thoughts. And before we begin, we'd just like to thank all of the contributors, especially Emily Boulet and the National Trust for Canada for web hosting and for the logistical and technical support, who this wouldn't be possible without. So starting on our panelists, Chris Wiebe is the Manager, Heritage Policy and Public Programs at the National Trust for Canada in Ottawa. Since 2007, Chris has organized the Trust's annual national conference, Canada's largest gathering of heritage practitioners and professionals, and led the organization's government relations, advocacy work, and development of positions on heritage policies. Chris holds a Master of Arts degree from Carleton University in Canadian Studies, Heritage Conservation, and the University of Alberta in English. He's been an instructor in the Cultural Resource Management Program at the University of Victoria since 2012, and sits on the Willowbank School for Restoration Arts Advisory Council from 2015 to the present. Chris is accompanied by Michelle Duong, who is a Master of Architecture student at Carleton University and a participant in the NSERC Create Heritage Engineering program. She's completed a graduate diploma in architectural conservation. Carleton was at Carleton. In the digitally assisted storytelling stream at Carleton Immersive Media Studio, also called SIMS, who we'll hear from a little bit later. Michelle also holds a BA in History and Theory of Architecture from Carleton and a Bachelor of Architectural Studies from the University of Waterloo. She's worked on a World Heritage Site documentation project with SIMS and will be completing an internship this coming summer with the National Trust for Canada. Without further ado, Chris, Michelle, please take the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Mario, Becca, and Stasis, and Grazia for your introductions. So I'll just get right into the presentation that Chris and I put together, and I'll be speaking for both of us. So just a brief overview of what I'll be talking about. I'm going to touch on what we're seeing in terms of client needs with respect to engaging digital content during this pandemic. Then I'll talk about the interactivity spectrum of digital content and share some examples of what is currently available. And then I'll move on to some accessibility considerations and finish off with some thoughts on taking action now to not only fulfill current needs, but also to look toward the future. So client needs in COVID times. Studies are currently being done to figure out what the public is looking for in terms of digital content during times of isolation. Wilkening Consulting has released a study about museum goers' needs, but I found this part of their study is relevant to anybody who's wanting to engage with culture and heritage. People are looking for escape and hope. And I particularly like this quote that they shared. Most importantly, I need an escape from the pandemic. I just want a place where I can hide from the pandemic for a little while. I can't even enjoy cat videos anymore because it's about cats and not just the quarantine. And the quarantine, not just about cats. People are also looking for experiences that contextualize the pandemic and ways to connect socially with others while in isolation. So how do content creators meet these current needs? Audience-specific content seems to be more successful than a one-size-fits-all approach. For those of you who are parents of young children, you'll relate to the fact that there is a demand for children activities that require little to no adult supervision. I'm showing here an example of Story Time for Kids. It's a weekly initiative by LA Conservancy that focuses on children's stories relating to architecture and urbanism. Many institutions are turning to social media platforms for outreach, such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and the content that's coming out right now is unpolished but popular. Just as there are varying levels of quality posted on social media, the content's also moving toward varying levels of immersion and interactivity. So similarly, virtual experiences online cover a spectrum of interactivity levels. This is something to keep in mind if you're creating content that is targeting a specific audience, or if your goal is to ensure your content is accessible to everyone. On this slide, I'm showing the different types of content currently out there and where they might lie on the spectrum of interactivity levels. So audio clips and still images require very little interactivity, whereas an active virtual reality experience or augmented reality sits on the opposite side of the spectrum, offering a highly interactive experience. Virtual tours sit somewhere in the middle, depending on the array of content that might be available within that tour. And I'll show a couple of examples today. The level of interactivity sometimes corresponds with the required efforts or resources used to produce the content, but that's not always the case. So some examples of current practices: videos. In short video segments called Corona Coffee Break with Lauren, Lauren Campbell shares his knowledge of various heritage sites around Moncton, New Brunswick. He's the Heritage and Culture Coordinator at Resurgo Place, home to the Moncton Museum and the Transportation Discovery Center. This is an example of low interactivity and something that is relatively easy to produce and disseminate. I wouldn't say these videos have gone viral per se, but in one day, this particular video reached over 1,200 people. Panoramic images. The website for Fort Conger in Nunavut has an array of digital content, but here I'm showing a panoramic image of a reconstruction of Greely's Expedition House. This type of panoramic experience is a little more interactive than a still image, but it would have required much more effort to create than a panorama that was stitched together with photos, since it would have required building a digital model and significant research. So virtual tours with interactive hotspots. This is the tour for Dundurn National Historic Site in Hamilton, Ontario. And it's an example of a medium-level interactive experience. Users can navigate through the house using the arrows in the 360 image or by clicking on the map on the left-hand side. In addition, there are hotspots that users can explore. And when you click on a hotspot, it enlarges an image and provides additional information about that artifact or painting. This is another virtual tour that is a little bit higher in interactivity. It has similar features to the Dundurn House. This is the Bellevue House National Historic Site in Kingston, Ontario. This also includes a navigable 3D model called a dollhouse that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. And users can interact with that and zoom into the different rooms and play with the hotspots. This one is also compatible with VR headsets or Google Cardboard on your mobile phone. In terms of passive reality, virtual reality applications, this Isanapi Writing on Stone virtual experience takes you to Alberta through a VR headset. This is a passive VR experience where users can look around, but they do not have control of the narrative. The experience has a set duration and storyline. It's narrated by an elder while the camera flies over a landscape, but it also includes animations to highlight information and enhance the user experience. Though it is accessible to people with compatible Oculus headsets, there is a less interactive version of this experience on YouTube. Here's an example of an active virtual reality application, which is highly interactive. This is the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. Within the house tour, users are able to open and move objects and zoom into the details of this carefully reconstructed 3D experience. This is also free to access, but again, to those with compatible VR headsets. Within this range of digital content, something to consider is how accessible the content is to the public. There are many kinds of accessibility, but today I just want to mention a few universal accessibility elements. This is a screenshot of the Senate of Canada virtual tour. I was part of the project team at SIMS for the first phase of the tour and looked closely at some accessibility considerations. One element that I helped with was the audio component. Voiceovers are an important part of the experience for those who cannot easily access the text, whether the user has visual impairments or other obstacles. We also included elements that covered a spectrum of interactive levels, and Katie will be talking more about this tour, so I'll leave it at there. This is the front page of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station Tour, CHARS for short, and I want to show this to point out the multiple languages that this tour was developed in. CHARS is located in Nunavut, where the 4 official languages are English, French, Inuktitut, and Inuktitut. Even if you may not be developing content for an official government organization, always be aware of who your audience may be and create content that is accessible and inclusive as possible. So I've shown a wide range of digital content currently out there, from quick and easy to professional, high quality, immersive content. But I just wanted to bring it back to our current situation where sites have been closed to the public to keep us all safe. This is Tim, and he's the head of security at the National Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. He is now also head of social media, since he is one of the very few people required to be on site. If it wasn't for Tim and his tweets that have gone viral, I would have never known that there was a cowboy museum. Although resources are limited right now, the museum is using this opportunity and social media to stay active, stay relevant, and to reach out to a new audience. The world is very forgiving of unpolished content right now, and we're attracted to the intimacy of content being shared and finding the humor in it. Folks just want to engage socially, and vulnerable, unpolished content can become popular. Once that wider audience has been captured, the higher quality content you may produce later will reach that audience. The virtual tours of the Hamilton museums that I showed were actually created many years ago, but their analyses have showed that the tours actually pique the interest of potential visitors, and the on-site visits have not slowed down. They are not a replacement for real-life experiences, something that many of us will want once the quarantine let up. For sites that already have this higher quality content, promoting it now may help site visits later. And with that, Steve and Katie and the other panelists will talk about such experiences in more depth. I just want to thank everybody on behalf of National Trust.
Okay, so thank you, Michelle and Chris, for the first presentation. Next, I want to introduce from the National Trust, from the SIMS Carleton Immersive Media Studio, Stephen Fye and Katie Graham. Stephen Fye holds a professional Bachelor of Architecture and a PhD in Religious Studies. He's a full professor at the Azrieli School of Architecture and Urbanism, where he teaches in the design studio and co-chairs the PhD program. He has taught courses on hand drawing and on various themes in the history and theory of architecture. Professor Fye served as the acting director of the School of Architecture, director, associate director, and graduate programs. His current research interests are at the intersection of architecture, image making, and hybrid technologies. He became the director of the Carleton Immersive Media Studio, SIMS, in 2007. Over the past decade, SIMS has developed 5 lines of inquiry that address the application of digital technologies in the context of architectural conservation and rehabilitation, digitization, building information modeling, simulation, digitally assisted fabrication, and digitally assisted storytelling. Also presenting Katie Graham, part of the faculty of the Bachelor of Media Production and Design at Carleton University. Prior to this appointment, she was actively involved for a decade with SIMS. While at SIMS, she led multiple digitally assisted storytelling projects that use SIMS digital assets such as panoramas, models, and point cloud data to create public outreach projects for the web, mobile, and virtual reality. Such projects include the Senate virtual tour, a web application that uses panoramas, photographs, and photogrammetry to teach of the Senate of Canada's architectural home, and the VR kiosk, 5 passive virtual reality stories focusing on the rehabilitation project of the Canadian Parliament buildings. Katie continues to be involved with SIMS as an associate faculty. Katie Graham received her Bachelor and Master of Architecture at the Azrieli School of Architecture and Urbanism at Carleton University. She's currently competing for a PhD in architecture with focus on the relationship between architecture and virtual reality storytelling, focusing on how the emerging medium introduces new narrative possibilities. So I would like to give the floor to Stefan and Katie now.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to Mario and Chris for inviting us to participate in this event. So good morning, everyone. We only have a few minutes today, and we want to talk about stories and storytelling, something that some philosophers and many so-called theorists argue is essential to the human condition. So this is a big subject for a small amount of time. So let's just get right to it. So we argue that stories, real stories, allow you to inhabit a place without having to be physically present in that place. In a story, a real story, it's not like being there, you are there. And I'm sure, or maybe I'm hoping, that some of you have had the experience of being literally transported by a story. If you haven't experienced that, I have some suggestions for summer reading. So this capacity for stories to move our imagination around the world while our bodies remain in quarantine makes storytelling fundamental to truly understanding heritage places from home. Because to fully and truly understand a heritage place, I would argue you have to be there. And so what is storytelling? On that point, we defer to Walter Benjamin, who argues that the storyteller is someone who can take their own experience or the experience reported to them by someone else, and in turn, make that the experience of someone who is listening to the tale. So my story becomes your story through its telling. Now, in closing my introduction, to some of the digitally assisted storytelling that we've been involved in at Carleton Immersive Media Studio, I just wanted to give two cautionary notes. First, while storytelling is fundamentally a human endeavor, it does not mean that all humans are storytellers. There is an art and a craft to storytelling, and as such, it requires talent and practice. And yes, we may be forgiving to some of the rough around the edges content that we see emerging today, but usually people are not that forgiving. My second cautionary note, we all know that technology can augment the telling of stories. And that technology can be a book made of paper, it could be the radio, or it could be an Oculus headset. But we have to be mindful that technology does not make a story, and technology cannot tell stories. Only human beings can do that. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Katie Gray.
Hi, so I'm going to continue on that thought and talk about a few of the projects that we've worked at Carleton Immersive Media Studio. And for all the projects that we've worked at there, we've had two main things that we really try to develop in order to make sure that we have that quality story. And one is a clear focus, and the other one is to make sure that it's accessible to the general public. To explore these two thoughts, I'm going to talk about two different projects. The first one being the Senate virtual tour, which Michelle already touched a little bit upon, and then the VR kiosk. So both of these projects have to do with the rehabilitation project of the Canadian Parliament buildings. So the center block of the Canadian Parliament buildings is currently under a multi-year rehabilitation project that has actually seen its closure. And SIMS has been involved in this rehabilitation project since the beginning through assisting in the documentation and modeling. And because of that, we have a lot of data, which you can see right here. We have point cloud data, photogrammetry, photos, modeling, lots and lots of content. The issue comes to when we want to make these stories is what do we show? And so since we had all this content, we wanted to disseminate it. We wanted to share it with the public. But we couldn't just upload it and share it because that wouldn't be a clear story. People would get lost in all of the data. So what we had to do is figure out a way to focus it and create clear narratives that would help guide the focus. And so we made it, instead of making one digitally assisted storytelling projects, we made many, two of which being the Senate tour and the VR kiosk. So for the Senate tour, that focus was on specifically the art, the architecture, and the furniture of the rehabilitation of the Senate spaces. So we used all the content that we had, or some of it, filtering it, so such as this point cloud that you see here, bringing us into the space to introduce the spaces within it. And then we used additional content such as 360 photographs to help you navigate through the space. This whole experience was very, it was self-guided. The person visiting could go and explore it however they wanted. But because there was that focus on the furniture, the art, and the architecture, they still felt guided through it, and they didn't get lost in all the content. You could navigate, as I say, through the 360 videos, as well as click on different hotspots that then gave additional information. As Michelle had mentioned earlier, there was an audio component, so then all of this was narrated. And all of the data that we had in it was from all of the documentation work. So we had the photogrammetric models, as well as some of the digital models as well, and photographs. For the VR kiosk, this was an experience that had 5 walk-up VR experiences that used 360 videos. That was in a project that was to celebrate Canada's 150th birthday. So a few years ago, across the street from Parliament Hill, there was this kiosk that had was quite popular that summer. Over the summer, there was 34,000 people who visited it. And these experiences were short little 360 videos of about 2 minutes each. And we created them using some of the content that we had. So the building information model, the panoramic photos, point cloud data, and historic photos. And each one had a different focus on the overall rehabilitation project, such as the relocation of certain elements, how the work is documented, as well as the history of the space. And you can see here from this clip of one of the experiences called The Evolution of the Hill, how we focused on these small narratives to help really make people understand a certain part. So here we're showing the fire of the original Parliament buildings and how it then was transformed into building the new one. Something to help make someone understand the importance of the historical site. So moving on to the idea of accessibility. For this, I mean actually being able to access the materials. So for anyone who works in any of this type of data, so any photogrammetric models or point cloud data or building information models, we know how large these files are. We all have special machines to use them. And even with those special machines, things crash and go slow, and we have to wait long times before something will load. This won't work when you're trying to share it with the public. You need to make it so then someone can be able to access it on their regular machine at home with whatever kind of internet they have. And for that, we had to make sure that things were modified and reduced in size to be able to access it. So there was lots of testing involved and reducing and all of this. And then also just being able to navigate and understand and have it be very simple to navigate through is also something really important. So there was lots of experimenting with that. When I started at Sims, we were not planning on being something that had a lot of computer programming in it. And by the end, we figured out that that was actually key to being able to share these stories. So for the VR kiosk, the idea of accessibility was a little different because this wasn't something online, this was something that was a physical exhibit. What we wanted to do is make sure that everyone who came to it could enjoy it. And that meant someone who had a lot of experience with VR and computer gaming, as well as someone who's never played a video game. So it was someone who could walk up, put a headset on, and then someone else would press the buttons. It was very passive and easy for everyone to enjoy. The other thing too is that, especially since this was a few years ago when most people hadn't tried VR, people were always worried about getting nauseous. So we wanted to make sure to reduce that risk by limiting the amount of moving parts and animations. And the result was actually quite successful, with a very high percentage of people saying that they enjoyed it. So we felt that this worked. I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Fye now.
Thanks, Katie. So in my opening, I had made a reference to Walter Benjamin and to his essay entitled, aptly, The Storyteller. And in that essay, he argues that a story, and this is where a story differs from entertainment. A story has a purpose. It presents a message. It doesn't give you an answer, but it engages you in the story. And again, in that potential of engagement with the story, there's the potential of a kind of a transformation or a translocation. One is able to visit these places through the stories that are told. And I think in our current situation, that ability to escape, even with just our imagination, is absolutely essential. So we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you for that great presentation. I would like to take this time to introduce our next speaker, Elizabeth Lee. She serves as the Vice President for Programs and Development for SCIARC, which is an international nonprofit organization with the mission to capture, archive, and share the world's heritage. Originally trained as an archaeologist with excavation experience in Turkey and Hungary, Elizabeth's been applying 3D technologies to the cultural field for over a decade. She has extensive experience in working with foreign governments and local communities, including cultural ministries and the United Nations Educational, Cultural, and Scientific Organization, also known as UNESCO. Additionally, she has interfaced with top technology companies. Elizabeth is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, and is a member of the US chapter of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, also known as ICMOS. By design, and I would like to invite.
Thanks so much for that introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone today. I want to focus on, and there have been some really good presentations thus far, kind of setting things up, but I want to talk a little bit specifically about what my organization, SCIARC, has been doing in response. And so I know you already provided an overview on SCIARC. Some of you may be familiar. We're a nonprofit organization, been around since 2003. And we've done work on over 200 projects on 7 continents. And really the impetus behind our work is this belief that 3D documentation has the power to transform the way that we manage, conserve, and understand cultural heritage. So I want to focus on that understand piece because that's kind of what we're talking about in terms of virtual access here. So a lot of this work that has happened for us in the last 6 weeks or so it really has come out of a project that we spent the last previous year working on in collaboration with ICMOS, this Heritage on the Edge project. And this program has been all about looking at the intersection between cultural heritage sites and climate change. And so the resulting project, focused a lot on how can we use this 3D data combined with local voices as a storytelling mechanism. So we don't have a ton of time here, but I did want to just pull up the site just to give you a sense. There are 5 different sites that are highlighted. The local voices, again, are a huge part of that. So how do you contextualize this heritage? It's really about what it means to the people that live there. And so you can explore any one of these sites in greater detail, learn about the climate threats, explore in 3D, and then again, have that narration of the local voices. And so that gave us a really a grounding to think about in the COVID-19 reality. How can we take some of those learnings from that experience of connecting people to these sites and trying to teach and provide information about a complex issue such as climate change? How can we leverage some of those lessons into focusing our efforts at a time when our teams would normally be out in the field? How can we do some good? So we focused on kind of three things. One has been the redesign of our website to highlight 3D models and virtual tours, and as well as just annotating those experiences. So as Stephen just talked about, figuring out the way to actually tell the story and engage people. And so we've integrated a 3D viewer, and each of the models, or many of the models that are up there now, have these annotations that let you explore. And then the other thing that we've done is we've worked directly with the sites to figure out how they can share this content through their own platforms. And so that's something that's actually been quite exciting. So, you know, reaching out to a number of the projects that we've worked with, this is Mesa Verde National Park here in the US. They're closed right now, but one of the first things that they link to is the virtual tour that's hosted on our website. So they may not have the capacity to host that locally, but we're now seeing a number of sites that are directing visitors or prospective visitors to these virtual experiences. And the result of that has been a huge, huge increase in web traffic for us. So we had kind of an initial increase at the very beginning as lockdown kind of started in the US, and that's only grown as we've published more content. So one of the exciting things about that is, you know, it lets you see, you know, to the point where there really is an appetite for this type of information, and people are coming to the site and spending more time. So I did just want to spend a minute going through the new section. So most of it's found in this Explore tab. And just to pull up one example, Waitangi, this is a meeting house on the North Island of New Zealand. And, you know, by loading these 3D models, people get more immersed in the site, right? So, and again, it's the annotations that really draw you in. And so in this case, we actually took content from the cultural manager of the Waitangi Treaty Grounds. He provided a tour, which in this particular platform that we're using, so right now it's just done with textual annotations, but you can kind of fly through the site, through these different annotations, highlight different pieces, and really, you know, you can also freeform explore, but the annotations kind of serve as a guide. Another piece of it, just to show one more example from the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, you know, again, developing this in collaboration with the Park Service. Some of this was existing content. So how do we just use some of these tools, and all of this is done through Sketchfab, to make this more available to the public. And the response has been quite strong in terms of not only the interest, but just the level of engagement. So you can fly right into the monument, as I've done here, and, you know, start out. And we also highlight, you know, it's a way, I think one of the things that we're looking at is how can you use some of these digital technologies in the 3D to highlight things that you couldn't normally do on site. So for instance, this pediment is quite significant. It's actually hard to see from the ground. You know, using the 3D model, you can explore the roof. You can jump to different parts of the site and see it from a new angle. And in particular, highlighting some of the conservation challenges that the site faces. This project was undertaken because of this biofilm that's growing on the monument, and the Park Service is trying to clean it. So, you know, being able to tell different types of stories through this, not only maybe the cultural significance of some of these places, but also some of the conservation challenges. And then the last thing that we've done as part of this is to publish more content through Open Heritage. And this is a platform, it's a consortium that we're part of that provides direct access to raw digital documentation of cultural heritage sites. So we are directly linking on any projects that have been published through Open Heritage. We're directly linking to this platform. You know, each of the sites, you can see what data is available. You can go ahead and download it. You request a download, you agree to the terms, and then you're sent a link to get access to the files. And then all of the files are made available via Creative Commons licensing. So in this case, we've licensed the majority of SciArt collected content under Creative Commons attribution, non-commercial, share-alike license. And so just to come back, you know, that's sort of the third point is we can enable virtual access to these data sets through Open Heritage. And so I talked a little bit about open heritage, but really the mission of it is to provide access to cultural sites and minimize this boundaries to accessing 3D data, as well as fostering community. So some of the benefits I didn't highlight on the site, but there's this, it's the central hub. Each data set is given a DOI. And any contributors actually have control over what's being published. So we now have over 100 data sets up there. There's been over 3,000 downloads of this content. And similar to the website, we've also seen a huge spike in the interest in accessing this content. So people are really hungry for this. And I think the take home for me is that there are a lot of different ways that with existing data that a lot of SEPA members probably have within their servers, that there are some ways to actually assist in cultural heritage right now. So if you are interested, please feel free to reach out, particularly around open heritage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Liz, for the very interesting presentation and the input on open heritage data. So next, I would like to introduce Antonia Spano and Giulia Sammartano from the Polytechnic University of Turin, talking about hybrid multiscale modeling for heritage sharing purposes. Antonia Spano is Associate Professor in Geomatics at the Architecture and Design Department. She teaches courses on architecture and coordinates the PhD program in architectural and landscape heritage. She is member of the Lab of Geomatics for Cultural Heritage, and she is co-chair of the ISPRS committee regarding ontology, semantics, and knowledge representation for geospatial information. Her research activities and publications focus on 3D metric documentation of heritage using advanced geomatics methods, focusing on standards and related to geospatial ontologies, semantics, and knowledge representation. Giulia Sammartano is a PhD in geomatics and an architect. She collaborates since 2014 with the Lab of Geomatics for Cultural Heritage also, where she carries out research on topics related to 3D documentation and rapid mapping systems in built heritage scenarios, in particular mobile mapping systems and SLAM-based scanners. She collaborates with the archaeological mission in Hierapolis in Phrygia of Turkey. Since 2018, she is part of the Geomatics Research Group of the Future Urban Legacy Lab Interdepartmental Center of the Polytechnic University of Turin, exploring research on urban modeling, numerical cartography, and 3D city models. So I'm giving her the floor now.
Sorry. I would like to explain what we mean for hybrid multiscale 3D modeling that we apply in heritage documentation. You can say we mean testing, deepen, and optimize rapid mapping 3D system 3D modeling in the domain of cultural heritage. In the recent past, and for many years, the consolidated methods to obtain dense, accurate, and rich 3D modeling in terms of geometric and thematic quality were essentially terrestrial laser scanning and close-range photogrammetry. More recently, we can count on the use of unmanned aerial vehicles photogrammetry, a mobile mapping system based on SLAM technology. That means method involving the sensor in motion. Considering a standard historical complex, we can use UAV photogrammetry for the broad survey of roof and environment, even mensuries in many occasions. Terrestrial laser scanning integrated to close-range photogrammetry for inside and outside high resolution and dense modeling of features and rich frescoed or frescoed heritage elements. Lastly, we can use terrestrial mobile mapping system corresponding to handheld scanners for underground or extensive low-resolution mapping and modeling. Sorry, I have some delay in sharing the slide. We're going to present some modeling activities in the archaeological site corresponding to the impressive site of the ancient city of Hierapolis in Phrygia, Turkey, inscribed to the World Heritage List of UNESCO for many years. Here, we achieved a very extensive project of digitalization and modeling activities covering many different levels of details and accuracy of the 3D outcomes. For example, the theater, which is one of the most attractive sites of the ancient city, employed now after restoration even for shows and concerts. It has been surveyed using multicopter UAV, performing a digital surface model and consequent texture mapping with a pixel dimension of about 2 centimeters, as many other monumental complexes in the city. In the theater, the backgrounds of the main architectural marble sheen, the hypoxenium, the tunnels of the vomitoria that give access to the auditorium, and many other underground or simply covered environments have been addressed by means of the SLAM-based mobile mapping system, which is able to acquire cloud by controlling its own trajectory through a process designed for robotic navigation system in an unknown environment. In other occasions, 3D models can be studied in order to offer the chance to other specialists to deepen the knowledge of architectural elements, constructive systems, materials, understanding ancient reuse of the structures, and classify measurements for archaeological certification and interpretation. Other times, we use 3D models with the aim to study strategies for and pipelines for the automatic derivation of drawings from the points of surface models, exploiting different intelligent algorithms that are able to identify features, borders, or changes on the surface direction. I can show you now a video performing a navigation of a fixed-wing UAV model that we achieved some years ago. We can observe by a bird-eye view the model of a processional way that climbs the hill through a monumental staircase, allow the pilgrims of Christian age to reach the sanctuary of San Filippo and the nearby Martyrium, which was a convent complex. Pilgrims were used to come here to venerate the relics of the apostles. So we can say that such kind of models can enable a virtual inspection for communication and dissemination purposes. Another video, In the next video, instead, navigate the model of another important monument in Hierapolis, which is the Nymphaeum of the Apollo Sanctuary. The specific feature is that we are seeing a navigation to an app named 3DOP that enables the sharing of 3D models using an interactive modality using a web page. In this case, it's not something like a touristic visit on the site, but we can use some tools to inquire the model and cut it with section planes. And we can see 3 different models of the building pertaining 3 different times of the excavation. So archaeologists can use these tools in order to check and to observe the excavation work result achieved during the last campaigns. Then the last one is another video pertaining again the Nymphaeum, but is used to compare the current state of conservation and excavation to an hypothetical reconstruction of the architectural marble ordered decoration on the front of the fountain. For example, the one that you can see overlaying the 3D model corresponding to the present situation on the site is a 30-year-old reconstruction. Now, stop because my colleague Giulia Sammartano is going to tell you something about our last campaign, and she will present you a model, and I don't reveal.
Can you close the screen, Anina, please?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, thank you, Nanina, and I will present briefly some first result about our last campaign in the archaeological mission. As Nanina introduced you, Hierapolis of Phrygia, many of you maybe know this site, is a very complex topographic site. There are a lot of monumental structures with high elevation and also topographic characterization that is the famous limestone hills. So it is 3 kilometers per 1.5 kilometer. So it's a very wide, very wide area to be surveyed. So this year, the complexity of the site required some experimentation about the new platform of data acquisition. And we try to use this new platform that acquire oblique and nadir images, and we produce a great 3D model and ortho image of the whole site. We acquired almost 4,000 images in 1 day acquisition. And now I go a little bit fast and I show you only the video. It's 3-minute video, so I go rapidly. This is some preview of the 3D model of the site. I show you the great difference in level between the area of Hierapolis. I show you also some example of the multiscale product of the ortho image that is a very high resolution ortho image. And now I show you this video. So let's enjoy this video. We collaborate with Apex Engineering from Ankara during the preparation of the survey, the flight plan. And this will be a little passive immersive navigation of the work and of the 3D model. This is the moment of the takeoff. The drone surveyed with this combination of oblique and nadir images, the whole area. These are 4 big blocks of images, and after the photogrammetric processing, we produce the point cloud. This is the main road of Frontino, and now the navigation beginning at the north part of the city and go down up to the hill. This is the ancient necropolis of the city. The Bath Church and the limestone hill. Up to the travertine pools, that is the typical touristic attraction of this site, together with the excavation site, obviously.
And this is an example of how point cloud navigation, an high quality point cloud with the navigation allow you to do a form of navigation and interaction also with the data. This could be a 3D model as a base of immersive navigation for museum and also for remote navigation. That is the typical matter in this moment. This is an example of the production and the generation of ortho image and ESM. And at the end, there is a final flight over the whole city on the Agora, the ancient Agora, and the necropolis. What about? Okay, sorry. And this is the final. Okay. Okay, I finish. And a little remark about our colleague. We collaborate on the Hierapolis project and survey campaign, and also a thanks to other people of our laboratory, from Laboratory of Geomatics, from Cultural Heritage, from Architecture Department of Politecnico di Torino. Thank you.
Thanks for that great presentation. I'd like to take the time just to introduce our last speaker of the webinar. Following this last speaker, we're going to have a question and answer period. I'd like to remind you to use the question and answer box that's on the bottom of the screen. So our last speaker, Juan Perez Arcas, is a geotechnical engineer. Since 2005, he's been involved in several geotechnical and structural monitoring programs, including cultural heritage projects. Juan is the product owner of the globally recognized wireless monitoring system, Load Sensing. He has more than 15 years of experience and knowledge of geotechnics, structures, construction site management, instrumentation, data management, data acquisition systems, and low power wide area networks. In geotechnical instrumentation, he's been a significant contributor in the shift from sporadic and manual readings to near-time data, thanks to the application of a low power wide area network technologies, which he'll talk to us about today. Juan?
Yes. Thank you, Becca. I want to thank you, Becca Napolitano and SIPA, for the organization of the webinar and for inviting World Sensing. Well, I'm going to talk about Internet of Things remote monitoring, and particularly about the application of low power wide area networks for the monitoring of cultural heritage. This slide presents a possible classification of the different wireless technologies that can be used for monitoring. The first group, the local area networks, are very well introduced in indoor monitoring and management of temperature and relative humidity in museums and galleries, and are proper technologies for short range distances up to 50 meters or something like this. The second group, the cellular technologies, with this technology, it's possible to reach long distances, but the communication is power demanding. So these technologies are not proper if you require to use battery powered devices, and you also require near real-time data. Finally, there are the low power wide area networks, which include technologies such as Sigfox, LoRa, and Urban IoT. With these technologies, it's possible to reach long distances and using battery powered devices. In World Sensing, we have developed a wireless system using LoRa, that is one of these technologies. LoRa is a long-range, low-power wireless platform, and it's the de facto technology for Internet of Things. What does it mean, long-range? So you have to consider that at favorable conditions, it's possible to reach 15 kilometers, 9 miles. And due to the sensitivity of the radio, it is possible to install the nodes into the historical buildings, even without line of sight from the node to the gateway, and being able to reach up to 1 or 2 kilometers. So it's possible to cover all the cultural heritage place with these wireless solutions. What does it mean, low power? No? For instance, in this example, sampling 5 sensors every hour, sampling and transmitting the readings every hour of these 5 sensors, the internal batteries will last after more than 10 years. So it is not required to provide external power for this data acquisition, and the internal battery, it's possible to use in devices battery power. So in world sensing, we have developed a wireless system which include nodes that are compatible with different sensor types, also gateways, and the required software to manage all the network and to make all the collected data accessible to other systems for post-process or further analysis. This system has been designed according to the requirements of the geotechnical and structural monitoring, and the main applications are for civil works and mines. But in many cultural heritage places, these wireless systems can provide very helpful information, very helpful data to manage, for a proper management of these places. In terms of the compatibility with sensors, the nodes can read the most typical sensor interfaces, no? Potentiometer, voltage, current loop. And also, we also have 2 pure wireless sensors that one is a wireless telemeter and the other is a laser distance node. I think it's more interesting to see what will be the application for the typical sensor used to monitor some heritage places. Now, for instance, with these wireless technologies, it's possible to read the opening of cracks. No, it's possible to connect crack meters to easily connect crack meters to internet, other displacement sensors. It's also possible to monitor strain and stress in structural elements, the load. With the laser distance node, it's possible to monitor the relative distance between pairs of points. This is a very interesting information. So it's possible to monitor the convergence between the walls of a historical building. That it's a typical concern in terms of the stability of the structure. It's also possible to monitor settlement, temperature, humidity, other environmental parameters, and also some parameters related to the surrounding area that are also affecting the historical building, like the pore water pressure or the water level. Another important measurement, because it's related to the stability of the structure, is the tilt with the wireless telemeter. Well, and finally, we also have software to manage all the network and to collect all the readings and then to make all this data accessible to other software for data visualization or also for further analysis. And this software simplifies all this management. Now I'm going to present 2 case studies. The first one is the Ponte Vecchio in Italy. In 2016, there was a collapse of the embankment of the Arno River, and this collapse was close to the Ponte Vecchio. After the collapse, it was implemented a complete monitoring program to be sure that this collapse, to detect any possible affection of this collapse on the bridge, and also to monitor any possible affection of the repairing works on the bridge. So several monitoring techniques were implemented, including terrestrial radar, total station, and also a wireless system to monitor the tilt. 8 tilt meters were installed at the piers of the bridge. And in this case, it was required a long-range wireless system. You can see that the distance between the gateway and the monitoring points was it was around 400 meters. And it was not possible to guarantee the line of sight between the monitoring points and the gateway. On the other hand, the low power consumption and the possibility of using a battery-powered device was critical because it reduces a lot the required time for the installation. Here you can see some pictures of the installation of these sensors. And as you can see, the installation was really difficult. No? So you can see here the firemen installing the tiltmeters and the nodes for reading them. And using battery-powered devices, you simplifies a lot the installation. And also, in addition, you avoid, you reduce any visual pollution, or visual impact caused by the cables and the protection of these cables. No? So you reduce the installation time, and you also avoid these visual impacts. The other case is the Gediminas Tower in Lithuania. It's the remaining part of a castle built on a hilltop. 2016 and 2017 were extremely rainy years in this area, and several landslides happened. Then, after these landslides, an emergency maintenance works starts, and it was also decided to implement a monitoring program to understand better, well, to monitor the slope stability, and also to provide additional information for the stabilization works. In this case, some figures about the wireless system. The wireless system includes 28 wireless tiltmeters, and also 5 nodes that are monitoring the force in a percentage of ground anchors installed to stabilize the slopes. Here you can see that in this case, the robustness of the equipment and being able to be installed outdoor, even in cold conditions, no, with the snow or these cold places, it was required. No? So it was not an indoor project, no? So it was required to use very robust products. In addition to the wireless system, 4 total stations were deployed to monitor 50 grids. In this slide, you can see an example, 2 screenshots from the data visualization software that is being used there. And well, there are some thresholds that can be set, and according to this, it's possible to implement some alerts to take some decisions. On the right, you can see the data from the tiltmeters. Most of these tiltmeters are installed on buildings and the defensive wall on top of the hill. And on the left, you can see the total station and the installed prisms. Finally, I want to say that this monitoring program is still in operation, no? So and probably will be extended for additional 3 years. And one of the advantages of a wireless system is that the flexibility that it provides. So during this monitoring period from 2016, it has been additional sensors has been installed, and it has been possible to easily relocate some of the nodes, no, due to the flexibility of these wireless solutions. And then, in addition, I want to say that the last Sunday, it was detected a landslide event, and it was possible to mitigate the effects, no, with taking decisions related to evacuate the personnel and take decisions also on the equipment. So in this case, the monitoring program plays a significant role. Well, so thank you very much. Do you have any question? I will. Okay.
So before the Q&A session, I would like to briefly remind everyone to use only the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask questions and upvote those that they find relevant to the topics addressed.
Great, thanks for reminding us about the rules status. So kind of looking at all the questions in the Q&A, there's a theme that really runs through there. It's how can we strike the right balance of robust documentation and the low cost or limited internet, which is a reality for many people. Liz, I think you might be a good person to start this out.
Well, thanks. That's a big question, and I think it's a really important one. You know, the way, I think there's been a lot of different things presented by multiple presenters, and I think, you know, one of the resounding things, you know, is that there are a lot of different ways to do this. You know, you can go with a very technical approach that involves very high-end tools and creates a very robust data set. But even just photographs, videos, the sort of, you know, cell phone video tour that I think Michelle mentioned can be extremely effective in terms of not only providing that personal connection to these sites, but also, you know, creating an engaging experience and something that's really low cost and low bandwidth. I think, you know, one of the important things to balance is, you know, we try to, when we have the budget on these projects, we try to hit every box in terms of creating data that not only supports the conservation and management of the site, but that can also be used on the interpretive side. That's not possible in all cases. You know, I think at a time right now where people are going to do the best that they can, I think we should be very open to these lower tech solutions. And, you know, the way that we've handled it is that we also use a number of off-the-shelf technologies. So, you know, we're using Zoom right now. They're a big company. They've created a good product. You know, we don't necessarily, I think sometimes in the cultural heritage field, we try to reinvent something that maybe already exists. So there are great, you know, video viewers, there are great 3D viewers that, you know, have this, have a lot of the tech behind it figured out to make it easier to reach people. So things like YouTube, things like social media are really effective. And so I would say for us, we try to look at all of it. And are there any tools out there on the technology side that we can just adopt? And being open to lots of different types of content.
Thank you, Liz. Maybe there is also some comment from the National Trust for Canada.
Thanks, Stathis. Yeah, no, I think this is a really interesting line of discussion, because I think a lot of groups are wondering about how to embrace some of these digital tools and yet do it in a cost-effective way. But I think there's also another concern, and maybe it leads to another question that's come up in the thread too, in terms of how to, you know, present these places in a cost-effective way. In a way that is also not digitally heavy, so that people can access them easily in rural areas. I think is another question. And I think Stephen and Katie, you were thinking about that in terms of the Senate tour, about kicking down the requirements, the digital requirements, to make sure that people maybe in remote areas could access it as well. Is that a consideration?
Yes, I can touch upon that a bit. So yeah, for all of the projects that we've worked on, we definitely focused on the size of everything to make it so that it was accessible. So there's lots of things that we've done, and mainly initially all of the videos, for example, were very high resolution, and then we cut it down. And for the Senate tour specifically, there were 2 different phases of it. And the second phase doubled the amount of content in it, but we actually spent a lot of time rebuilding the whole tour in a new program in order to make it actually half the size of the original. And So a lot more time went into the back end to make sure things were manageable for people to access.
I think there's two things here. One is available bandwidth, which is like in a country like Canada and the United States. I mean, there's a lot of rural areas that are underserviced, indigenous communities that are very underserviced by internet. And I think that this is something that governments need to address. And on the other side, I would just like to reemphasize what Liz has said. There are a lot of technologies out there that are a lot of open source softwares that you can use, for example, to make photogrammetric objects or do photogrammetric surveys. And quite frankly, you know, a cell phone does a pretty good job of taking photos for making, for documenting some heritage objects. So it's definitely possible. Coming back to our point, I would just say that you still have to tell a good story. That's the important part. It doesn't matter what technology you use, you have to have a good story to tell.
Okay, great. If there's not another comment, I can definitely move on with the next question, but thank you for that wonderful question to many of you who put it into the Q&A. The next question was originally directed at Elizabeth, but I think it's something that a lot of the panelists can actually talk about. So it says, thank you for the great presentation. I'm Ona Valekis, member of the Executive Committee of ICOMOS-SIPA. The Heritage on the Edge project seems really relevant to our work in heritage documentation and risks. Do you see an opportunity for SIPA to start collaborating with SCI-Arc on this project? And a follow-up question that was very similar was about if Juan's work could also be interfaced with SCI-Arc. It's really this idea of collaboration, what we can do in this time. Who would like to start?
Well, I'm happy to say, you know, we would love to do more collaborating across the board with SIPA. I think the, you know, the Heritage on the Edge, we worked specifically with the Climate Change Working Group within ICOMOS, and that's been, that project has actually, our funding for that project has finished. I think we are looking at ways to extend that because this challenge of cultural heritage and climate change is something that extends far beyond the 5 sites that we worked with. So I think, you know, we'd love to have more conversations, particularly around, I didn't get a chance to talk on it here, but at each of the sites that we did a more in-depth workshop as part of working with the local site managers. So they were heavily involved in the project, not only participating in the workshop, but providing expertise, providing their local knowledge in the forms of videos and interviews. But I think even around that training component and around some of the data applications, I'm sure we could really benefit from more involvement from SIPA there.
Thanks for that answer, Liz. And there's a complementary part to that collaboration question, talking about how we bring in ideas like what Juan presented on with the Internet of Things. And so, Juan, how do you see your work interfacing with the work that others have presented here today?
Well, this is a very interesting question. Well, I think that one of the goals is that all the different systems that are available, no, should try to be open and to have APIs to interact to be able to interact the different softwares, no, with the different data. No? Finally, the data from the sensors, even related to the structural performance of some elements, could also be presented in some 3D models, no, or could be complementary to some photogrammetry analysis, no. So I think that we have to avoid to have closed boxes, no, and try to interact the different systems, no. For this, it's important that each of the systems has to provide open ways for sharing the data. And then the other point is to share the knowledge with webinars like this and to try to generate some community, especially explaining the good practices and share these good practices.
Great, thanks Juan for answering that. Is there anyone else who'd like to follow up about collaboration, or can we move on with the next question? All right, so the next question that we have from some of the people in the audience is, could you share experiences of community involvement in these documentation projects? How are their needs considered? How are they involved, et cetera? And Steve, I think you might be someone who's good to start this one off.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely, I think, essential to engage the community in any of these projects. I mean, in some of our projects, and there's the kind of community engagement where you know, where the community is a group of concerned individuals who are, you know, looking for to part a specific message. But also a lot of the projects that we worked on and that Katie showed today were working with the federal government, and that's a whole other kind of community that has its own protocols and concerns. And so on the one hand, you have people who are concerned about the content, and on the other hand, there are, and I think this is true in any project, there are people who are concerned about making sure that the information is released in the most appropriate manner for that organization. So you know, I've been going on about, you have to have a good story, but you have to make sure that everybody who is involved in the project is on board to tell that story and how the story should be told. So I think for us, that's something that we try to establish at the very beginning, very open communication with the people that we're working with, and a communication that continues throughout the unfolding of the project. I don't know if Katie wanted to add anything to that.
I guess the only thing to add would be how for a lot of the stories, for the Senate tour, for example, when we created the script, it was Senate Communications that helped create that script. And then we had numerous different people help review it and refine it. And for the VR kiosk as well, those stories were very short. But even that, there was numerous people who got to review it. And so it was really, even if there was one author, there was numerous people reviewing, and the editing, that was actually one of the most important things in all of those projects to help refine that story.
Great, thanks Katie for that response, and Stephen for your response. The next question is about the longevity of what each of you has been creating. How does this data exist going forward in the future? How does it persist? How do you ensure that there's access to it and interoperability? And I think Nanina and Gia, you might be a great place to start for this one.
Yes, so we can say that in an archaeological site, the longevity is to be has to be considered differently, I think, instead of, I don't know, general cartography, because archaeologists need to know many information about past intervention, past excavation. So I think that this kind of models can have a long life, because in the archive can be useful for many times. In fact, they always they often say that their documentation in very many years ago is not so complete. So I think that this kind of 3D modeling can offer for the next future a very good information of some current situation that is evolving in the time.
Yeah, and I thought I'd maybe just jump in and say that, you know, on the longevity, I think this 3D data actually has incredible longevity when it's in its sort of raw and archival state. I think a lot of the things that we've seen presented here, you know, whether it's the full-on virtual tour or these annotated models or complete like storytelling experience, the technologies around those byproducts or derivatives are going to change, actually. You know, 3D viewers are going to change the amount and quality of video that we can stream. Even things like, you know, websites, I'm sure many of you have been to sites that were maybe built in Flash and then are no longer supported. I think those things change a lot over time, but, you know, we've been doing this nearly 20 years in terms of this data. And as part of this web refresh, you know, we've gone back to, again, that source data and have reprocessed it with new tools and are able to get some amazing kind of results out of it. So I think the onus on the longevity of this is thinking about, you know, not just these derivative products, but how we actually maintain that data and keep those archival records. Because that's what people are going to want to go back to. They're going to want to go back to that source material, not necessarily our interpretation of that today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we want to, I mean, I would think we would want to transform those secondary products down the line. I mean, our expectations of what we want to look at are going to change. If you think about what we were looking at 10 years ago and what we're looking at today, it's going to change. But I agree with you, Liz, 100%. And as you say, point cloud data is very, very stable.
Yeah, it's amazing, and you know, that's part of I think part of our interest in like the Open Heritage 3D platform is that that's not making these models available. We may add some of those derivatives down the road, but it's LiDAR data, it's the photos themselves that make up the photogrammetric model and the camera poses. And that's it. And then people can take that and remix it and reuse it. And the amazing thing that we found, you know, I said that there's over 100 sites. Every single site has been downloaded at least once. So even these data sets that are maybe seemingly a little bit obscure, there is an interest there, you know, and I think as a community, if we make our work, you know, more available, it will also further that longevity and reuse.
Great, thank you for that great discussion. That kind of went from longevity through archival data. Our next question deals with education, and it was specifically directed at Nanina and Julia, but I think it can open up for a broader discussion. It's about, can the interactive models where you can navigate and measure be utilized for educational purposes in universities or heritage and architectural courses during COVID times especially? And I think this goes for anyone's projects. How do you think you can interface with universities around you to benefit education during this time?
I can start and then maybe Julia can continue. I think that in our field of study, we had occasion to use this data with students, and we propose exercise using this technology in order to make the student experience the generation on this kind of 3D models, which is our main objective in our didactic activity. So it's important to refer that students were so enthusiastic to work using this kind of data. I think that your question was about the use of this model. I think that we tried many times to interact with our colleagues that teach archaeology, because I think that they should say if for them it's important to use this kind of model or interactive model in their didactic activities. In our field, we use it in order to make some training, in order to teach how to generate these models.
Yes, I agree with Nanina. I think the two problems are in this particular moment how to teach about this model and to use this model, and after the creation of this model, how to use not only for us but for other expertise as archaeologists, etc. And particularly, there are a lot of open source or commercial viewers that can be used to share this kind of videos. I mean, for example, 3DOP that is open source, or Sketchfab that is a repository online in which you can upload and use and navigate, measure. The question is the interaction, about also the interaction. I think one of the most difficult thing is to optimize the amount of data for the use, but yes, the interaction with the 3D model, a complete interaction with the texture, the geometry, etc. is very important, especially for archaeologists or restorers, for example. Yes, and also some devices more recent about virtual and augmented reality surely benefits a lot from the use of this kind of 3D models, and we currently make some experimentation also about the use of this model with devices for augmented reality, and now more than ever maybe this is the moment to invest in these aspects.
And just on the education front, you know, we're actually seeing a lot of use from presumably like primary and secondary education. We have, you know, on our analytics with the website, we see a lot of traffic actually coming from classroom.google.org, so teachers sharing it. And I think that's exciting, you know, thinking about the next generation, that not just teaching, you know, heritage professionals, but teaching maybe future heritage professionals that have an interest in learning more about these places, especially at a time when, you know, field trips are something that are not going to happen anytime soon. There's the possibility for virtual field trips and to still engage youth in the importance and protection of these sites.
Chris, do you have a comment?
Sorry, Becca, I'm just wondering, it's Chris Weed here from the National Trust. I just want to build on, building on what Elizabeth was just saying there, and thinking also to some of the comments that the others on the panel have mentioned. I wonder what, if people could comment on that thread of questions that's coming through about storytelling and about connecting that with these kind of digital experiences. It strikes me we're almost sort of in the infancy of this whole kind of genre, kind of like film was, you know, during the silent era, where they're trying to figure out how to like tell stories with film. And I wonder, you know, what you're seeing or what people on the panel are seeing in terms of how to do that best. I'm thinking back to that Asanipi Writing on Stone World Heritage Site, which is this incredible indigenous site that Michelle brought up in her presentation, where you were immersed along with an indigenous elder who's telling you stories about that place. Of course, it's challenging and how to do that in a sensitive way, but I think that strikes me as something really interesting in terms of opening up places rather than just sort of, I mean, we're at the stage where we're sort of clicking on things and getting explanations about different objects in rooms. That's crucial. But I'm wondering if people have comments on how to, you know, what's the cutting edge? What's the new frontier in terms of marrying those two, you know, those two kinds of things, story and the digital representation?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it there a little bit, Chris. I think it actually, and Stephen too, it's about people, right? And it's about the people's connections to these places. And so, you know, these kind of pre-baked experiences are quite nice in that you can explore them at any time on your own. But I could see, especially in a, you know, stay at home and limited travel, that it really is about marrying those people with expertise with some of this digital content in a more live and interactive experience. So sure, it's fine if I can go and click and hear this, you know, read what this person has to say about it or hear their voice. But wouldn't it be great if it were some format like this where you're presenting it, you're somebody that lives in the community, and you know, here's my personal perspective on this site. I think that is something that hasn't been done that often, and this is maybe a new opportunity to do some of that. But I think it comes back to the people and the stories that they have about these places.
Yeah, I think this experience with platforms like Zoom, it always bothers me when someone, you know, tries to see the future as a result of a technological pivot, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think this. I think we're learning new ways to communicate in this way. And again, to Liz's point, I mean, the idea of having someone available live to address a question about someone visiting a place virtually. Honestly, it's not something I would have really thought about or considered as viable, you know, 3 months ago. But now, actually, it kind of, you know, makes sense. And I think everyone's, again, we've learned how to do this. It's now learned behavior. So I think I don't think we can even imagine yet. And Chris, I think this is what you're saying. We can't even really imagine yet how this is going to impact the way we consider, you know, visiting a heritage site. It's kind of exciting, actually.
All right, and I think that in terms of time kind of wraps up what we have for the question and answer period of this. The recording will be made available online, but thank you so much for your participation. At this point, I'd like to turn the floor to Grazia for some final words.
Good morning, everybody. So sorry. I had some problems with the microphone of my laptop today. And as chair of the SIPA Permanent Commission on Education and Dissemination, it would have been my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Now I can only thank you for this webinar. So I would like first to thank Mario and Chris to have developed this idea, the supporters, ICOMOS, NCRC, Create Heritage Engineering Program, the National Trust for Canada, and mainly I am grateful to the organizers, the SIPA emerging professionals, for their work, energy, and enthusiasm. COVID-19 pandemic is impacting our life and will continue to do so in coming months. We are currently teleworking, confined in our homes. We all know that art and culture contribute to our well-being, intellectual stimulation, and resilience in facing challenges. While nothing can replace the intense experience of a live orchestral concert, we have a list of activities we can do and places we can visit without leaving the comfort of our home. Museums, opera houses, and the tourist attractions across the world are making more and more content available online to make the self-isolation and the social distancing more enjoyable and relaxing for everyone in these times of confinement. The offers is amazing. Interactive map, a vast collection of 3D cultural heritage objects and places. As we have just seen, a lot of projects using photos and point clouds, which are aimed to recreate buildings and environment in 3D. Even underwater heritage, we would never been able to visit. Researchers and the innovation projects have been developing a 3D application, virtual reality and augmented reality for many years. This is bearing fruit with many cultural outlets now offering virtual tours online. Many considerations emerge from this new way of enjoying culture. Words such as quality, ethics, democratization, technologies, way of fruition open wide panoramas to be discussed. And the panelists today faced some of them with their own background. I mention only a couple of points among the other. The first is that this so-called digital revolution with its innovative tools should not reduce the virtual tour to a substitute for a visit to the heritage sites that we are not now granted. In my opinion, it should be a mean of knowledge which allow us to see what would not be visible even if we were in front of the object or the sites, so that it will enrich our visit after this pandemic too. The second is that we should think to use this digital cultural heritage to have an access from home, considering it not half a heritage site or only a virtual substitute, but two heritage sites. And that one accessible from remote for monitoring the condition of the sites, the environmental conditions, or some parameters related to the structural behavior, and with a view also to the management, booking of tickets, for example, or to space the touristic accesses. How do countries cope with these challenges? What are the solutions? The COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented challenge requiring an unprecedented response. We need to think about the future. Even when the pandemic is declared over, the scars will remain. Today, we started to give some answers. I hope we will have the chance to continue. Thank you, and sorry again.
And now for some final thoughts from Mario Santana. Mario, are you with us still? Okay,
yes,
good,
I'm sorry. You know, I first of all, I would like to apologize for my Zoom dyslexia, if we can call it that way. And secondly, you know, being nervous while no one is around me. I think this is a new feeling. Usually I don't get nervous when I'm talking, but now that nobody's around me, except my dog and the cat, and I feel kind of nervous. But well, it's very difficult to summarize everything that has been said. I think everything that the panelists have been saying is very important. And especially, I would like to thank Gracia for her final thoughts, because I think they are very important. And I always look at wisdom at Gracia. She always has very good and elaborate messages. Now, I think that we have seen throughout the talks, for instance, Chris and Michelle talk about, you know, things to keep in mind by creating content for outreach. Know and target your audience. Be considerate of all levels of interactivity and universal accessibility. I think these are very important points, especially accessibility. Michelle mentioned, you know, people are forgiving because of COVID pandemic. And I think this is also important. We can, for instance, organize this webinar and have people from around the world, from, you know, Canada, all the way to Australia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and we can reach all these people. And I think that also Steve alluded to this fact that we have this kind of tool, and we should take full advantage of it. Now, also, Chris and Michelle mentioned about the higher quality of contents that attracts visitors, but it's not a replacement of visits. And I think that Gracia alluded to that very importantly, and also Steve and Liz and Nanina and Julia also mentioned these important points. Then followed by Steve and Katie's talk, I think that I was very thrilled with the message of them talking about, you know, the issue of Benjamin argues that the story serves a purpose. It's something that he calls giving counsel or advice. And Steve talked a little bit about how this differs to entertainment. And then everybody, and I think also through the questions and answers, we talk about how to centralize people in this conversation. So we are informing people about something, and we have to kind of make that message not only accessible, but also making that message meaningful and respectful to the sites that we are presenting. Liz explore and mention some of the initiatives that SCIARC is being developing. I think that the climate change one is very interesting. I think also the consideration of using the Open Heritage 3D with the kind of, I wouldn't say raw data, but the data in a format that people can utilize for other purposes was very important. And also the contribution to communities. I think that Liz alluded to this, and this also came up on the questions. And Steve mentions about communication with the community, and then Chris Whip talk about this opportunity of, you know, having somebody, so as an elder, talking directly to the people. So I think that this actually is also quite important. Then Nanina and Julia talk about, they showcase different types of technologies and how you can utilize these technologies to present archaeological sites and creating meaningful three-dimensional applications, etc. And I think that that's very important. And I will hook up with Nanina and Julia about the didactic aspects of 3D models. Liz also alluded to the fact that their Open Heritage portal has increased in the number of visitors, especially from teachers and students. I can tell you as an educator, I'm a professor at Carleton University, besides my ICOMOS voluntary role as vice president. And I am thinking, how would I get my students to record a site? And I realized that I have to lower my expectations. And I think there is a lot of data out there. So in this kind of transition period in quarantine, maybe what we should provide is a little bit more of the data that we have and develop some of the processing skills. And we have to neglect a little bit that acquisition phase that probably as things get a little bit more normal will be coming. And then finally, I think that Juan talked about monitoring sites using the Internet of Things, of how to remotely access sites. And that brought me, earlier this morning, I attended the ICROM seminar, which is also talking about the COVID impact. And they were talking about secondary problems caused by COVID and not accessing the sites, such as looting. We didn't allude to that in the webinar, but there is looting happening in sites because there is no one there. We could have a fire, and actually there was a fire in one church, one historic church in Haiti lately. A few weeks ago, and that's important to note. So I think that this kind of monitoring real-time Internet of Things is an emerging area that promises to be very important. Now, there were questions, now moving into the questions from the audience. There were questions, very important questions about cost and technical approach. We talked about different approaches in the technicalities, very high accuracy gathering of data, or just taking photos with your mobile. I think that those are all fine. I think that one point that I want to stress, and I think that everybody talked about this, is the quality of that communication that we are producing. I mean, and I like that quote from Steve that he says, you know, it's not the technology that transmits the message, it's the person that is behind the technology that actually transmits the message. And I think that that's an important commitment that we all have to see. There was also about the interaction with monitoring tools and Juan's idea. I think this is another emerging area that we have to look. Collaboration between organizations such as the Project of Heritage on the Edge that was mostly focused on the collaboration with the ICOMOS Climate Change Working Group. I think we can expand and try to find collaborations in all these aspects. And longevity of data, it was alluded, is also important. We talked about the fact of having that processed raw data that can be readable by everyone, but then you have these byproducts that might die in some subsequent stages. And I think this is important to realize that not everything is going to be there, but the important data should remain. Now for my, let's say my closing, I would say that this is not the last webinar we're going to plan. I have been delegating a lot to Becca and Statis and Michelle, and this is really great. They're excellent people to delegate. I will keep doing it, and they will take on. I mean, it's also their initiative. So they are looking into organizing a webinar dealing about low-cost recording tools for heritage documentation. And also the National Trust, which is called, and Michelle is doing an internship, is also thinking about doing one on digital technologies for heritage sites. So I think this is important. Another message that I want to convey to you on behalf of ICOMOS is that COVID-19 is a global pandemic, but even though it's a global problem, it's being tackled locally. So it reminds that phrase that you have to act locally and think globally. Our webinar has both been staged for national people in Canada and US and other Italy for people from the speakers, but it has also this kind of international participation that has been really important. So I hope that all participants will try to implement some of the ideas that we have posed in their own local context, and this will help somehow mitigate the effects of quarantine, staying at home, etc. So I would like to thank everyone that has been accessing the webinar from home. Especially, of course, I would like to thank my colleagues at the National Trust in Canada, our colleagues from the SIPA Emerging Professionals, our NSERC Heritage Engineering Program, and especially all the panelists. I hope that we can give a big applause to the panelists. I know that we are muting everyone, so you are just hearing me, but that's fine. I'm sure that if we were able, we will hear all the applauses by everyone. And I want to mention to you a little bit about ICOMOS. So ICOMOS is the International Council of Monuments and Sites. We are one of the biggest professional networks dealing with the conservation of cultural heritage. We are all members of ICOMOS are abide by the ethical principles of our organization. And one core obligation of our ICOMOS committee is fostering the exchange of knowledge. So I invite you to all participate, not only in these webinars, but eventually, if there are other activities such as the SIPA conference, the General Assemblies of ICOMOS, etc., to participate, because this is a stage which you can actually exchange your ideas. And it's the only way we can find common approaches. And actually, because we're all working heritage, we are not working, in a very business-oriented environment. We're working in a very social and important field. So, with this, I would like to close my intervention, and thanks again to everyone for being there. I also want, before I forget, I also want to thank Emily from the National Trust, because she has been behind scenes getting everybody connected, and this is also extremely important. So thank you so much.